They were the men who made the nation laugh, cheer, and swoon. From the football terraces to the silver screen, these British icons defined the cultural landscape of the 20th century. But when the front door closed, the charm evaporated. Behind the blackout curtains of their luxury homes, a dark secret festered, a reign of terror involving fists, fury, and fear. Tonight, we shatter the pedestals of 10 national heroes to reveal the domestic tyrants hiding in plain sight. Sir Sean Connery. In the collective imagination of the 20th century, no man defined the concept of cool masculinity more than Sir Sean Connery. As the original James Bond, he was the suave, sophisticated secret agent who could disarm a villain with a quip and seduce a woman with a raised eyebrow. He was the ultimate alpha male, a rough-hewn Scot who had been polished into a diamond by the Hollywood machine. To men, he was an idol to be emulated. To women, he was the fantasy of the strong, silent protector. His voice, deep and commanding, was the sound of authority itself. However, behind the tuxedo and the Walther PPK, the man who played 007 held views on relationships that were as archaic as they were dangerous. For his first wife, the talented actress Diane Cilento, the reality of living with the world's most desirable man was not a fairy tale of romance, but a nightmare of volatility and physical intimidation. The marriage between Connery and Cilento, which began in 1962, was intense and passionate, but it was forged in the fire of Connery's explosive temper. Cilento was a successful actress in her own right, nominated for an Academy Award for Tom Jones, but at home, she was expected to submit to the traditional role of the dutiful wife. Connery, born into a hard working-class background in Edinburgh, carried with him a rigid belief system about a man's place in the household. He was the king of his castle, and any challenge to his authority was met with a terrifying aggression. Cilento later wrote in her autobiography, My 9 Lives, that the abuse began early in their marriage. She described a harrowing incident in a hotel room in Spain where, during an argument, the screen legend allegedly struck her with such force that she was knocked to the ground. It was a moment that shattered the illusion of their glamorous life, revealing the brute force that lurked beneath the Bond persona. What makes the case of Sean Connery so chilling is not just the allegations made by his wife, but the fact that he publicly admitted to his philosophy on violence against women on multiple occasions. In a notorious interview with Playboy magazine in 1965, at the height of his Bond fame, he stated, "I don't think there is anything particularly wrong about hitting a woman, although I don't recommend you do it in the same way that you would hit a man." He went on to justify the use of an open-handed slap if a woman was being bitchy or hysterical. It was a shocking admission, yet in the 1960s it was largely dismissed as man talk, a reflection of the era's casual misogyny. The world was so enamored with the character he played that they refused to hold the actor accountable for his repugnant views. Decades later, one might have expected a retraction or an apology as societal values shifted. However, Connery remained defiant. In a 1987 interview with Barbara Walters, a time when domestic violence was finally being recognized as a serious crime, he was asked if he regretted his earlier comments. Astonishingly, he doubled down. He told a stunned Walters that he had not changed his opinion, asserting that if a woman wants to have the last word and you give her the last word, but she continues to argue, then it is absolutely right to strike her. It was a moment of televised arrogance that revealed the depth of his conviction. He truly believed that physical force was a legitimate tool for a man to maintain control over a woman. The shadow of this abuse hung over Diane Cilento for the rest of her life. She struggled to rebuild her confidence and her career after escaping the marriage in 1973. While Connery went on to win an Oscar and be knighted by the Queen, becoming a national treasure beloved by millions, Cilento was often dismissed by the press as a bitter ex-wife. The industry protected its hero. Directors and producers turned a blind eye to the domestic disputes, viewing them as private matters rather than criminal acts. It was a conspiracy of silence that allowed a man to be celebrated as a global icon while his victim was silenced. Sean Connery died in 2020, eulogized as a legend of cinema, but for those who listened to Diane Cilento, his legacy is forever tainted by the knowledge that the hands which held the golden gun were also used to hurt the woman he vowed to cherish. George Best. If there was ever a man who embodied the sheer, unadulterated glamour of the swinging 60s, it was George Best. With his long dark hair, his mesmerizing skill on the football pitch, and his twinkling blue eyes, he was dubbed the Fifth Beatle by the press. He was the first footballer to transcend the sport and become a bona fide pop star, a working-class boy from Belfast who conquered the world with Manchester United. In 1968, after lifting the European Cup, he was the most famous man in Britain, a national treasure whose charm seemed limitless. To the public, his love of women, fast cars, and champagne was part of the legend, the George Best lifestyle that every man envied. He was the lovable rogue, the cheeky chappie who once famously quipped that he spent his money on booze, birds, and fast cars, and squandered the rest. However, behind the myth of the party-loving genius lay a darkness that was anything but charming. Best was a man consumed by a severe addiction to alcohol, a disease that turned the beautiful boy into a violent, paranoid aggressor the moment the front door closed. The demon drink was not just a social crutch for Best, it was the fuel for a terrifying rage that he unleashed upon the women who tried to love him. His relationships were defined by a cycle of intense passion followed by explosive violence. His first wife, the model Angie Best, whom he met in the United States in the 1970s, described a life of walking on eggshells. She spoke of a man who could be the most generous, loving soul in the morning, but by the evening, after the alcohol had taken hold, he would transform into a monster she did not recognize. The jealousy was pathological. Best could not handle the idea of his partners having independence or attention from others. He viewed them as possessions, trophies that belonged to him, and any perceived slight could trigger a physical assault. The public saw the glamorous photos of the couple at airports and nightclubs. They did not see the bruises hidden under oversized sunglasses or the fear in Angie's eyes when the cameras stopped flashing. The violence escalated significantly in his later years, particularly during his marriage to Alex Best in the 1990s. Alex, a former air hostess who devoted her life to trying to save him from his addiction, became the primary target of his frustration. The golden boy of football had become a sad, bloated figure, but his capacity for harm had not diminished. In her autobiography, Always Alex, she detailed a catalogue of abuse that shocked the nation. She described incidents where Best would drag her by her hair across the room, kick her, and punch her in the face with a force that left her battered and humiliated. One particularly harrowing incident occurred in a hotel room where, in a drunken rage, he allegedly cut her face with a set of keys. It was a brutal, cowardly attack by a man who was still being cheered by thousands of fans every weekend as a legend of the game. What makes the story of George Best so infuriating is the way the British public and the media enabled his behavior for decades. He was treated with kid gloves, his violence dismissed as the unfortunate side effect of his genius or his illness. When stories of his domestic abuse surfaced, the tabloids often framed him as a tragic victim of his own talent rather than a perpetrator of crimes against women. The narrative was always about poor George and his battle with the bottle, rarely about poor Alex and her battle for survival. He was given pass after pass because he had scored a goal in the European Cup final. The culture of celebrity worship protected him, allowing him to maintain his status as a hero while he terrorized his wife. Even after a liver transplant in 2002, a procedure that saved his life, he continued to drink and continued to abuse, proving that his entitlement was as deep-seated as his addiction. George Best died in 2005, and his funeral was a state event in all but name. Hundreds of thousands of people lined the streets of Belfast to mourn the genius. The eulogies spoke of his dribbling, his goals, and his charisma. Few mentioned the women he had beaten. His legacy is a complex and uncomfortable one. He was undoubtedly one of the greatest players to ever kick a ball, a man who brought joy to millions. But he was also a domestic tyrant who used his fists to control the women in his life. The lovable rogue persona was a lie that hid a violent bully, a man who was adored by strangers but feared by his family. His story serves as a stark reminder that talent is not a character reference, and that sometimes the heroes we worship on the pitch are the villains we should fear in the home. John Lennon. To the world, John Lennon is a secular saint. He is the man in the white suit, the visionary who sat in a bed in Amsterdam for peace, the genius who wrote Imagine and asked us to dream of a world without possessions or greed. He is the icon of the counterculture, a man whose round glasses and long hair symbolize a generation's hope for love and understanding. In the 1960s and 70s, he was the voice of the anti-war movement, a working-class hero who stood up to the establishment. However, the man who sang All You Need Is Love was, by his own admission, a man who struggled to show it to the people closest to him. Behind the philosophy of peace lay a deep-seated rage and a history of domestic violence that stands in stark, uncomfortable contrast to his public image as a gentle pacifist. Lennon's first marriage to Cynthia Powell, whom he met at Art College in Liverpool in the late 1950s, was the primary theatre for his aggression. While the world saw the witty, charming Beatle, Cynthia lived with a man consumed by a terrifying, possessive jealousy. In her memoir, John, she described a relationship defined by his volatile temper. The most infamous incident occurred early in their courtship when, in a fit of jealous rage because she had danced with his friend Stuart Sutcliffe, Lennon struck her across the face in a corridor. It was a moment of physical violence that foreshadowed the controlling nature of their marriage. He demanded total loyalty and obedience, expecting Cynthia to mold herself into his ideal woman, often comparing her unfavorably to Brigitte Bardot, while he was free to pursue his own desires. The psychological impact of this behavior was immense. Lennon was a man of extreme contradictions. He could be incredibly tender one moment and viciously cruel the next. He used his sharp tongue, the same weapon that made him a brilliant songwriter, to belittle and humiliate Cynthia, chipping away at her self-esteem. He was terrified of losing her, yet he pushed her away with his anger. The lyrics of some of his most famous songs offer a chilling glimpse into this mindset. In the song Run for Your Life from the Rubber Soul album in 1965, he sings, "I'd rather see you dead, little girl, than to be with another man." At the time, listeners tapped their feet to the catchy melody, ignoring the threat of femicide in the chorus. Even in the song Getting Better, he confesses, "I used to be cruel to my woman. I beat her and kept her apart from the things that she loved." It is a testament to Lennon's honesty, perhaps, that he eventually admitted to his violent past, but this confession does not erase the trauma he inflicted. In a famous interview with Playboy magazine in 1980, just months before his death, he stated plainly, "I was a hitter. I couldn't express myself, and I hit. I fought men, and I hit women." He framed his later advocacy for peace as a direct reaction to his own violent nature, a desperate attempt to redeem himself. However, for Cynthia and for the son Julian, whom he often neglected, the damage was already done. The peace and love era was, for them, a time of fear and instability. The world has largely chosen to forgive John Lennon. His assassination in 1980 turned him into a martyr, freezing him in time as the apostle of peace. The uncomfortable truth of his domestic abuse is often glossed over in documentaries and biographies, treated as a minor footnote in the story of a musical genius. But the reality remains that the man who asked the world to give peace a chance was unable to practice it in his own living room. His legacy is a complex tapestry of brilliant art and personal failure, a reminder that the messages in a song do not always reflect the character of the singer. He was a hero to millions, but to his first wife, he was a jealous, controlling tyrant who used his hands to hurt rather than to heal. Peter Sellers. If comedy had a face in the 20th century, it was the elastic, ever-changing visage of Peter Sellers. He was the man of 1,000 voices, a genius who could disappear so completely into a role that he often claimed he had no personality of his own. From the bumbling Inspector Clouseau in the Pink Panther series to the 3 distinct characters he played in Dr. Strangelove, Sellers was hailed as the greatest comic actor of his generation. He was a national treasure, a man who brought the absurdist humor of The Goon Show to the masses and conquered Hollywood. To the public, he was a lovable eccentric, a man whose chaotic personal life was just another facet of his artistic brilliance. However, for the women who married him and the children who called him father, life with Peter Sellers was not a comedy. It was a psychological horror film directed by a man with a terrifying void where his soul should have been. The most famous of his 4 wives, the Swedish actress Britt Ekland, whom he married in a whirlwind romance in 1964, became the primary witness to his descent into madness. To the paparazzi, they were the golden couple of the swinging 60s, the funny man and the beauty queen. But behind the doors of their luxury apartments, Sellers was a tyrant of almost operatic proportions. He was consumed by a jealousy so intense that it bordered on paranoia. He could not bear the thought of Eklund receiving attention from anyone else, even professional colleagues. He viewed her not as a partner, but as a possession that existed solely to reflect his own glory. When the spotlight shifted away from him, his mood would darken instantly, transforming the funny man into a figure of menacing silence and explosive rage. The abuse Eklund suffered was both physical and deeply psychological. Sellers was a master of manipulation, using his own hypochondria and threats of suicide to control her. He would stage heart attacks or threaten to kill himself if she tried to leave or argued back, trapping her in a cycle of guilt and fear. The violence was erratic and often triggered by the smallest of slights. Eklund described incidents where he would fly into a rage over a perceived look or a comment, destroying furniture, tearing up her clothes, and physically assaulting her. In one particularly harrowing episode, he allegedly smashed a valuable watch she had given him, screaming that he did not want her charity before turning his aggression on her. He was a man who used his physical presence to intimidate, looming over her with a cold, dead look in his eyes that she described as terrifying. This behavior was not limited to Eklund. His first wife, Anne Howe, and his later wives, Miranda Quarry and Lynn Frederick, all experienced variations of his volatility. Sellers treated his family like props in his own life movie, and when they went off script, he punished them. His children, Michael and Sarah, were also victims of his cruelty. He would wake them in the middle of the night to demand they tell him they loved him, only to scream at them moments later that they were ungrateful. He once famously told his son, "I love you, but I don't like you," a sentence that perfectly encapsulated his inability to form genuine human connections. He used his wealth and his fame as weapons, constantly threatening to disinherit them or cut them off if they did not obey his whims. Peter Sellers died in 1980 at the age of 54, leaving behind a legacy of brilliant films and broken lives. In a final act of spite that seemed to confirm his tyranny, he left the vast majority of his fortune to his fourth wife, Lynn Frederick, leaving his children with a paltry sum of roughly £800 each. It was the ultimate power move from beyond the grave, a final reminder that he controlled their destinies. The world mourned the loss of a genius, playing clips of Clouseau falling into fountains, but for Britt Eklund and his children, the grief was mixed with a profound sense of relief. They had survived a man who was incapable of love, a national treasure who was, in reality, a domestic monster who used laughter to hide the screams of his family. His story is a chilling example of how we often confuse talent with virtue, allowing a man to be a hero on screen while he plays the villain at home. Dennis Waterman. To the British public in the 1970s and 80s, Dennis Waterman was the ultimate cheeky chappie, the tough-talking, hard-drinking Cockney hero who defined a generation of television. As Detective Sergeant George Carter in The Sweeney and the lovable bodyguard Terry McCann in Minder, he was the epitome of the lad's lad. He was the man every guy wanted to have a pint with, a national treasure who even sang the theme tunes to his own shows, cementing his status as a multi-talented icon. His on-screen persona was that of a rough diamond, a man who could handle himself in a fight but had a heart of gold. However, the line between his hard-man characters and his real life was often blurred, and for the women closest to him, the tough guy act was not a performance to be applauded, but a terrifying reality to be endured. Waterman's reputation as a man's man was built on a culture that celebrated heavy drinking and aggressive masculinity, traits that he carried into his private life with devastating consequences. His marriage to the actress Rula Lenska, which began in 1987, was hailed by the press as a union of two television heavyweights. To the outside world, they were a glamorous power couple, gracing the covers of magazines and attending premieres with smiles that hid a volatile and toxic dynamic. Behind the closed doors of their home, the lovable rogue was often replaced by a controlling and aggressive partner whose behavior was fueled by alcohol. The charm that won over millions of viewers was a mask for a deep-seated insecurity and a temper that could flare into violence at the slightest provocation. The extent of Waterman's tyranny was not fully exposed until years later, and shockingly, it was confirmed by the actor himself in a moment of candid arrogance that stunned the nation. In a controversial television interview in 2012, long after the marriage had ended, Waterman admitted to striking Lenska. However, rather than expressing remorse, he attempted to justify his actions with a statement that revealed a disturbing mindset. He famously claimed that while he had hit her, she was not a beaten wife, arguing that there was a distinction because she was a strong woman who could fight back. He went on to utter the chilling phrase, "It's not difficult for a woman to make a man hit her," effectively blaming the victim for his own lack of control. It was a glimpse into the psyche of a man who believed that violence was a legitimate response to verbal conflict. For Rula Lenska, the reality of living with Waterman was far more traumatic than his dismissive comments suggested. She described a marriage dominated by his drinking, where she constantly walked on eggshells to avoid triggering his rage. The strong woman defense he used was a classic abuser's tactic, implying that because she was resilient, the abuse didn't count or wasn't real domestic violence. This gaslighting served to minimize her pain and protect his public image. The industry too played a role in this protection. For decades, Waterman's Jack the Lad behavior was excused as high spirits or the eccentricity of a star. Directors and producers knew he was difficult, but as long as the ratings were high, the minder was allowed to behave as he pleased. The legacy of Dennis Waterman is a stark reminder of how popular culture can normalize toxic behavior. For years, audiences cheered as his characters used their fists to solve problems on screen, unaware that the actor was using similar methods at home. When the truth finally came out, it divided opinion, with some die-hard fans refusing to believe their hero could be a wife-beater. Yet, his own words stand as the most damning evidence against him. He was a man who brought joy to millions with his performances, but who left a trail of emotional and physical scars in his personal life. Dennis Waterman died in 2022, remembered by the industry as a legend of television, but remembered by Rula Lenska as a man who could not separate the violence of his roles from the sanctity of his marriage. His story challenges us to question the tough guy archetype we so often celebrate. Paul Gascoigne. If there is one image that defines British sport in the 1990s, it is the sight of a young man with tears in his eyes on a football pitch in Turin. Paul Gascoigne, affectionately known as Gaza, was the clown prince of English football, a genius with the ball at his feet and a smile that could light up a stadium. He was the catalyst for Gazamania, a cultural phenomenon that saw football return to the mainstream after the dark days of the 80s. To the nation, he was a lovable, vulnerable boy who just wanted to play the game. He was the joker in the pack, the man who brought plastic breasts to training sessions and fished for chickens with a rod and line. He was adored by millions, a national treasure who represented the sheer joy of living. However, behind the tears and the practical jokes lay a deeply troubled man, battling demons of alcoholism and insecurity that would turn his home life into a war zone. The object of his affection and his aggression was Cheryl Gascoigne. When they met, she was the stabilizing force he desperately needed, the woman who tried to keep his feet on the ground as his fame skyrocketed into the stratosphere. But as the pressure of being the nation's hero mounted, Gaza's behavior became increasingly erratic and controlling. He was a man consumed by a terrifying jealousy, unable to handle the idea that Cheryl might have a life outside of him. The love he felt for her was suffocating and possessive, a toxic mix of dependency and rage. Friends and family saw the warning signs, the sudden mood swings, the paranoia, and the aggressive outbursts that were often fueled by his heavy drinking. Yet, the public remained largely unaware, preferring to focus on his brilliance on the pitch rather than the darkness in his private life. The horrifying truth exploded into the public consciousness in 1996, shortly after his heroics at the European Championships. During a stay at the luxury Gleneagles Hotel in Scotland, an argument between the couple escalated into a brutal physical assault. In a fit of drunken rage, the lovable Gaza attacked his wife, leaving her with a fractured finger and severe bruising to her face and arms. The images of Cheryl that appeared in the press days later were shocking. She was pictured with a cast on her arm and her face swollen, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses, a stark visual contradiction to the image of the happy-go-lucky footballer the country adored. It was a moment that shattered the myth of Paul Gascoigne, revealing a man who used his physical strength to intimidate and harm the woman he claimed to love more than anything. What made the situation even more disturbing was the reaction of certain sections of the media and the public. There was a palpable sense of denial. People did not want to believe that their hero, the man who had united the nation with his talent, was a wife-beater. Gascoigne himself often played the victim, crying in interviews and blaming the pressure of fame or his addiction for his actions, rather than taking full responsibility for the violence. He would apologize, promise to change, and then the cycle would repeat itself. The narrative was often spun as Gaza's battle with his demons, a phrasing that subtly shifted the focus away from the pain he inflicted on Cheryl and onto his own internal struggles. It was a classic case of a celebrity being afforded a level of sympathy that would never be granted to an ordinary man who had committed the same crimes. The marriage to Cheryl ended in divorce in 1998, but the trauma of those years lingered. Cheryl later wrote a book detailing the extent of the abuse, describing a life of constant fear where she never knew which version of her husband would walk through the door, the funny, generous genius or the violent, paranoid drunk. Paul Gascoigne's story is a tragedy of immense proportions, a tale of a man who had the world at his feet but destroyed his own happiness and that of those closest to him. He remains a beloved figure for his footballing exploits, but his legacy is forever shadowed by the violence he brought into his home. He serves as a painful reminder that the tears of a clown are often shed not for the world, but for the wreckage left behind when the laughter stops. Oliver Reed. In the pantheon of British cinema, Oliver Reed was the ultimate hellraiser, a man whose off-screen exploits were as legendary as his performances. He was the brooding, dangerous presence in films like Oliver and Women in Love, an actor of raw, visceral power who could command the screen with a single glare. To the public, Reed was a source of endless fascination and entertainment. He was the professional drinker, the man who would appear on chat shows visibly intoxicated, recounting tales of barroom brawls and epic consumption. He was celebrated as a lad's lad, a throwback to a time of unbridled masculinity. His drinking bouts were treated as heroic feats, and his chaotic lifestyle was romanticized by a media that loved a good headline. He was the wild thing of the industry, a man who lived life on his own terms regardless of the cost. However, the lovable rogue persona that Reed cultivated for the cameras hid a much darker and more tragic reality for the women who tried to share his life. Behind the closed doors of his home, the alcohol that fueled his legend also fueled a terrifying volatility. His first wife, Kate Barn, whom he married in 1959, bore the brunt of his early descent into alcoholism. While the world saw a charismatic star, she lived with a man who could transform from a charming lover into a violent aggressor in the blink of an eye. In later biographies, the extent of the turmoil was laid bare, with accounts of physical altercations that left emotional and physical scars. The fun of his drinking was a myth. The reality was a cycle of abuse and remorse that trapped his family in a state of constant anxiety. The violence was not limited to his first marriage. His relationship with the dancer Jackie Darrell, and later his second wife, Josephine Burge, were also marked by the chaos of his addiction. Reed was a man who needed to dominate his environment. He was known for his tests of loyalty and his need for control, traits that became dangerous when mixed with his prodigious intake of spirits. There were reports of furniture being smashed, of terrifying arguments that lasted until dawn, and of a man who used his physical size and imposing presence to intimidate those he claimed to protect. He viewed himself as the patriarch, a role he interpreted as having absolute authority, an authority that he would enforce with his fists if he felt challenged or disrespected in his own home. What makes Oliver Reed's story so uncomfortable is the extent to which his behavior was enabled by the culture around him. The television producers who booked him for interviews, knowing he would be drunk, the drinking buddies who cheered on his excesses, and the fans who laughed at his antics, all contributed to a permissive environment where his violence was overlooked. He was a character, and in the British entertainment industry of the 1970s and 80s, being a character was a get-out-of-jail-free card. The bruises on his partners were hidden away, The police were rarely involved, and the show went on. Reed was the clown who bled his family dry of their peace of mind, while the audience applauded his authenticity. Oliver Reed died in 1999 during the filming of Gladiator, collapsing in a pub in Malta after a final, massive drinking session. His death was mourned as the end of an era, the loss of a great British eccentric. But for those who knew the man behind the myth, the grief was complicated by the memory of his rage. He was a brilliant actor who could have been a knight of the realm, but he chose to be a prisoner of the bottle. His legacy is a stark warning about the dangers of romanticizing addiction. We celebrated the monster he played on screen and the monster he became in the pub, but we ignored the monster he was in the kitchen, leaving the women in his life to pick up the pieces of his shattered glass. Freddie Starr. In the 1970s and 80s, Freddie Starr was a force of nature on British television. He was the chaotic, unpredictable clown prince of variety, a man who could sing like Elvis Presley one minute and perform a manic, slapstick routine the next. He was a comedian who seemingly had no off switch, a ball of energy that captivated audiences with his sheer unpredictability. His fame was cemented by one of the most iconic headlines in tabloid history: "Freddie Starr ate my hamster." Although the story was a fabrication, it perfectly encapsulated his public persona as the wild, zany eccentric who would do anything for a laugh. He was a household name, a man who hosted his own primetime Saturday night shows and commanded audiences of millions. To the public, he was the ultimate entertainer, a man who lived to bring joy and anarchy to the screen. However, the manic energy that made him a star on stage translated into a terrifying volatility behind the closed doors of his home. For the women in his life, particularly his wife Donna and his children, the madcap genius was a domestic tyrant who ruled with an iron fist. Starr's unpredictability was not a source of amusement in the living room, it was a source of constant dread. He was a man of extreme mood swings, capable of switching from charm to menacing aggression in a heartbeat. His daughter Jodie later described living with him as living with Jekyll and Hyde. She spoke of a childhood dominated by fear, where the sound of his key in the lock would cause the temperature in the house to drop and the family would brace themselves for whatever mood he had brought home. The violence Starr inflicted was reportedly brutal and sustained. His ex-wife Donna described a marriage that was a catalogue of physical and emotional abuse. She recounted harrowing incidents where Starr would lose control over the most trivial matters. On one occasion, during their honeymoon, he allegedly gave her a black eye because she had looked at another man. This was not an isolated incident, but the beginning of a pattern of coercive control. He viewed his wife as his property, and any perceived act of independence or defiance was met with swift retribution. He would reportedly throw plates of food against the wall if they were not to his liking, and physical assaults were used as a tool to maintain dominance. The lovable clown was, in reality, a bully who used his physical strength to intimidate a woman half his size. The psychological toll on his family was immense. Starr was a master of gaslighting, often denying the abuse or blaming his victims for provoking him. He would buy lavish gifts after a violent outburst, a classic cycle of abuse designed to keep his family trapped in the relationship. He used his fame and wealth as weapons, threatening to leave them destitute if they ever spoke out. For his daughter Jodie, the trauma was compounded by the public's adoration of her father. She had to watch as millions of people laughed at the man who made her mother cry, a disconnect that was deeply confusing and painful for a child. The world saw a hero, she saw a monster. Freddie Starr died in 2019, alone in a small apartment in Spain, estranged from much of his family. His death marked the end of a sad decline for a man who had once been the king of British comedy. While the obituaries focused on the hamster headline and his comedic timing, his daughter chose to speak the truth about the man behind the mask. Her testimony serves as a powerful corrective to the myth of the tortured genius. It reminds us that the energy that lights up a stage can sometimes burn down a home, and that for the families of such men, the laughter of the audience is often drowned out by the silence of their own fear. His legacy is a stark example of how we often forgive the cruelty of famous men as long as they keep us entertained. Sir Geoffrey Boycott. In the gentleman's game of cricket, few names command as much respect and division as Sir Geoffrey Boycott. For decades, he was the immovable object of the English crease, a batsman so technically gifted and notoriously stubborn that he became known simply as the greatest living Yorkshireman. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, he was the backbone of the national team, a man who played with a grim determination that embodied the grit of the North. After his retirement, he seamlessly transitioned into the commentary box, becoming the voice of the sport for a new generation. His blunt, no-nonsense analysis and his trademark hats made him a beloved caricature of British eccentricity. To millions of listeners on Test Match Special, he was a national institution, a man who spoke his mind and suffered no fools. However, behind the public persona of the straight-talking traditionalist lay a private history that was far less amusing, a history marked by a conviction for a brutal assault that he has steadfastly refused to acknowledge. The incident that shattered the image of the lovable curmudgeon occurred in 1996 at the Hôtel du Cap in Antibes, France. Boycott was on holiday with his then-girlfriend, Margaret Moore. What began as a dispute over something as trivial as an unpaid bill and a pillow escalated into a violent confrontation that left Moore battered and bruised. The court in France heard that Boycott, in a fit of rage, had pinned Moore down and punched her in the face 20 times before leaving her in the room to check out. The medical evidence presented was damning. Photos showed Moore with blackened eyes and severe bruising that contradicted Boycott's claim that she had simply slipped and fallen. It was a moment of shocking brutality from a man who had built his career on discipline and control. Despite the overwhelming evidence and the subsequent conviction by the French court in 1998, Boycott's reaction was one of absolute denial and arrogance. He received a 3-month suspended prison sentence and a fine, but he never accepted the verdict. To the press and the public, he portrayed himself as the victim of a foreign legal system and a hysterical woman. He used his status as a sporting legend to brush off the conviction, famously quipping that he didn't give a toss about the criticism. This refusal to show remorse or even admit that the assault took place revealed a disturbing aspect of his character, a belief that his status as a national hero placed him above the moral judgment of ordinary people. He treated the conviction not as a mark of shame, but as an annoyance to be swatted away like a loose delivery. The most controversial chapter in this story came years later, in 2019, when it was announced that Boycott was to be knighted by then Prime Minister Theresa May, a self-confessed cricket fan. The decision sparked immediate outrage from domestic violence charities and campaigners across the United Kingdom. They argued that bestowing the highest honor of the land upon a man with a conviction for assaulting a woman sent a dangerous message, that sporting achievement outweighs moral conduct. Adina Clare of the charity Women's Aid stated that knighting Boycott was an insult to every survivor of domestic abuse. Yet, Boycott remained defiant. When asked about the criticism during a radio interview, he snapped back that the incident happened 25 years ago and told the presenter to give over, effectively silencing any discussion about his violent past. The knighthood went ahead, cementing Boycott's status as Sir Geoffrey, but for many, the title is forever tarnished. His story is a powerful example of how the British establishment often closes ranks to protect its own. He is a man who was convicted of a violent crime against a partner, yet he was welcomed back into the commentary box and the honours list as if nothing had happened. The greatest living Yorkshireman may have scored thousands of runs for his country, but his legacy is complicated by the fact that he used his power and his profile to evade the social consequences of his actions. He remains a hero to those who only see the batsman, but for those who look closer, he is a stark reminder that talent on the field is no guarantee of decency off it. His refusal to apologize remains a silent wound in the history of the sport he claims to love. John Thaw. To a global audience, John Thaw was the intellectual, melancholic face of British justice. As Inspector Morse, driving his vintage Jaguar through the historic streets of Oxford to the sound of opera, he created one of the most enduring characters in television history. He was the thinking man's detective, a role that earned him 2 BAFTA awards and the adoration of millions. Before Morse, he was the rough and ready Jack Regan in The Sweeney, defining the gritty policing of the 1970s. He was a pillar of the acting community, a man of immense talent and gravitas. However, the sensitivity he displayed on screen as Morse was often absent in his private life during the height of his fame. For his wife, the celebrated actress Dame Sheila Hancock, life with the national treasure was a roller coaster of deep love and terrifying violence, fueled by a severe addiction to alcohol that threatened to destroy them both. The public image of Thor and Hancock was that of a golden couple, two giants of the stage and screen who had found their soulmates. But in her brave and candid memoir, The Two of Us, published after his death, Hancock revealed the harrowing truth of their early years together. Thor was a man possessed by demons, using alcohol to numb a deep-seated insecurity and self-loathing. When he drank, the quiet, introverted man vanished, replaced by a volatile aggressor. Hancock described a home life that was often a war zone. She detailed incidents where Thor would become physically abusive, lashing out in a drunken rage. The violence was not just a result of arguments, it was the manifestation of a sickness that turned the man she loved into a stranger who terrified her. The abuse was significant enough that Hancock frequently considered leaving him. She described nights of fleeing the house to escape his temper, of hiding bruises, and of the profound loneliness of being married to a functioning alcoholic. The tragedy was compounded by the fact that the industry celebrated the hard-drinking actor archetype. In the 1970s, Thor's behavior was often normalized as part of the lad culture that surrounded shows like The Sweeney. His drinking buddies saw a fun companion. His wife saw a man who was slowly killing himself and hurting his family. The pressure to maintain the facade of the happy celebrity marriage meant that Hancock suffered in silence for years, protecting his reputation while enduring his cruelty. It is important to note that Thor's story is also one of redemption, though it came at a high cost. In the late 1980s, facing the loss of his wife and his health, he finally confronted his addiction. He stopped drinking and spent the last decade of his life sober, transforming back into the gentle, loving man Hancock had married. However, this sobriety did not erase the past. Hancock's memoir was groundbreaking because it refused to gloss over the bad years. She made it clear that even good men and national heroes can be perpetrators of domestic abuse. She shattered the myth that violence only happens in broken homes, showing that it can exist behind the velvet curtains of the most privileged lives. John Thor died of cancer in 2002, mourned by a nation that felt they had lost a friend. The outpouring of grief was immense, a testament to his power as an actor. But when The Two of Us was published, it added a necessary layer of complexity to his legacy. It forced the public to reconcile the beloved Inspector Morse with the man who had once beaten his wife. Thor was not a monster in the simple sense, but a flawed human being whose addiction unleashed a monstrous side. His story serves as a somber reminder that the characters we invite into our living rooms every week are performances, and the real drama often happens when the cameras stop rolling and the front door is locked.